Hello, and welcome to Please put all questions in caps and start with an emoji.
Let's go. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to Alienate UK with a bonus afternoon edition. I've got massive guests coming on, Mr. Anthony Peake. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon at very, very short notice. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this morning. So not bad.
Yeah, quite literally. But anyone who's noticing the accents of us both, we have established that there is a good Scousman connection. So it's not going to be kicking off, and we've already talked football a little bit, so we'll move on from that. So welcome to the show. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. Looking forward to it. It's going to be good. Going to be fun.
It is. Right. So you are an author. Yep. Am I right in saying that you've started writing your 13th book? Is that correct?
13th book has just been published.
Right. So I'm just going off your Facebook profile. That's all. So
yeah, no, the 13th book was published in the States in the middle of November, and because there's been a complexity with the distribution in the UK from my publishers, but this will be due. My new book on near-death experiences will be out in the middle of March. In the UK, but it's already out. It's already out in Audible and Kindle and everything else as well. It's just the hardback. It's just the paperback version that's been the delay.
So you can get it on like Amazon and
yeah, and also if anybody's interested, you can get directly from my website, because I'm traditionally published. I'm not vanity published or sort of anything like that. So publishers pay me to publish my work, which is all very good, but it does mean that sometimes you're under their control in terms of things. But effectively, I've negotiated with them, and I have a number of copies of the new book available for UK readers if they want to order them off my website. So if you go on to anthonypeake.com and go on to Bookshop, you'll find the advance copies prior to it being released in the UK. And on top of that, if anybody's interested, I sign the copies there, and you will also get a free unique bookmark, which will only be available for the pre-orders as well. And there'll be a special template in the front of the book. So if anybody wants an advance copy, just contact me on the website. But the book will be out in bookshops, in libraries, and you'll get it in most bookshops in the UK. And on top of that, if the bookshop hasn't got it, you'll be able to order it. So it's going to be there and available.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Thank you. I have just put a link up for your website, which is usual www.anthonypeake.com, and that'll take you straight to it. So there you go. Anyone want a copy, as Anthony just said, then just follow and just go from there. So how did you start writing about near-death experiences? What was it that led you down this path?
I've always, ever since I was 10 or 11, I've been fascinated. Funnily enough, my entree into the world of esoteric ideas and things was the UFO phenomenon, and it was the UFOs that really interested me initially. Way back in the mid 1960s, I read a book called Flying Saucers Are Hostile, written by, I think it was Brad Steiger, who fortunately many years later I communicated with, which was really great to be able to speaking to your heroes. But effectively, I've always been interested in extraordinary human experiences. And the reason being that way back in 1966, I was down with double pneumonia. And I had a series of very vivid hallucinations at that time. And even my 12-year-old mind was quite fascinated by, well, the things I'm seeing seem to be in the external world, but they clearly are part of my brain is creating them, but it's placing them in the external reality. And even at 12 years of age, I was fascinated by this. And I started reading up about it. And I managed to get a part work at the time called Man, Myth and Magic, which came out, which started to really focus my interest on the anthropology, the sociology of extraordinary human experiences. And fortunately, when I had the opportunity to go to university in the early 1970s, I went to the University of Warwick, and I managed to do a double honours degree, dual honours degree. So 2 degrees at the same time, one in history and one in sociology. And I was able to focus in on the historical aspects of religious beliefs, you know, why people believe certain religions and everything else. So the sociology of religion. I was also interested in the sociology of language and the sociology of communication. But while I was at Warwick, I also became involved in a small paranormal group. And we used to bop around the countryside trying to find ghosts and things. So it was all very interesting. So I was doing it as an intellectual exercise. I was doing it academically, but I was also interested in it in other ways as well.
Yeah.
So this is what makes my position on this rather unique, in the sense I take a rigidly academic, scientific approach to the phenomenon, but I believe the phenomenon is genuine. It's a question of how we interpret it. So near-death experiences was something that over the years I'd become fascinated by. And when I had the opportunity to write my first book way back in 1999, I'd done a business contract out in Poland, and I had sufficient money to be able to take a year out from my work as a contractor. And my wife said, well, why don't you take the year out, write this book you want to write about? What do you want to write about? And I said, I really don't know, but I think it's going to be something to do with near-death experiences. And I started researching, and I joined the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And I became particularly interested in one particular aspect of the near-death experience, and that's called the Panoramic Life Review. And from there, the book developed itself, and I became interested in Deja vu as a phenomenon, precognitions, linking precognitions with near-death experiences. And from there, a year later, I had a book. And then the challenge was then trying to get a publishing deal. And because I did not want to go down the route of vanity publishing, I really wanted to be a proper author, not somebody who pays another publisher to publish their books, because I felt take any rubbish because you're paying them. But eventually in 2005, I was approached by Professor Bruce Grayson of the International Association of Near-Death Studies, who's professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia. And he was the editor of the Journal of Near-Death Studies. And he was fascinated by my work. I told him a little bit about my ideas about the near-death experience and my unique stance on the near-death experience, which we'll come into later, which is a concept called cheating the ferryman. And Bruce said, well, why don't you write an academic article for us? I'll peer review the article, and you write an academic article, and we will publish it in our journal, which is what I did, which then gave me the academic kudos to be able to approach publishers with a far bigger approach. I mean, I'd done my first degree, I'd done postgraduate at the London School of Economics, so I had a little bit of academic credibility, but not to the extent I needed. But the academic paper started to give me more credibility. And the publisher Arcturus, it was a strange story. I sent the manuscript in to Arcturus Publishing in London, and the director, the owner, Ian, was heading over to America to do a business meeting. And he went to his desk, and he just grabbed one of the manuscripts on the desk, which happened to be mine. And he read it on the plane. And when he arrived in New York, he contacted straight back to the head office in London and said, we want this book. It's absolutely fantastic. So they called me in, and I wasn't expecting an offer, but they gave me an offer, gave me an advance. And as they say, the rest is history, because that book was published in 2006, called Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die. And that now sold 75,000 copies worldwide in English alone. And it's translated into numerous foreign language editions. It's in most major European languages, and it even recently came out in Greek for example.
Wow.
And so it's proven very popular, and it's still my best-selling book, even though all the other books work on that principle. But that
Yeah.
book has proven incredibly popular, and it means that I have a very, and I thank the guys out there who are very, followers is not the wrong word, but I have supporters who really, really believe in my work. And there's more and more of them right across the world. I mean, at the moment, one of them is negotiating a deal with a Chinese publisher, China, and she's trying to get it. And she's translated my book, one of my books, 3 of my books, sorry, she's translated into Chinese, and she's negotiating with my publisher and with the Chinese publisher to get the book out in Chinese as well. So that's the basic background.
Yeah. So you mentioned deja vu when you're saying about the NDE.
Hadn't you said that before? Didn't you ask me that before?
No,
you didn't.
But that is.
Sorry, I'm being silly. I'm being silly.
I did think that, but I wasn't sure. I thought just in case. No, but so you mentioned obviously deja vu. How do you connect the deja vu with the NDE? What's your take on it?
Okay, it was the deja vu phenomenon that really opened up the doors for me to come up with the cheating the ferryman hypothesis. The reason being, I was doing with my work, I do a considerable amount of research, and I read many academic papers. For instance, my new book on near-death experiences, I've read virtually every single academic paper that's been published on near-death experiences and associated subjects for the last 50 years. You know, I just read and read and read. And I have what's technically called eidetic memory. It's not quite eidetic memory, but when I read something, I don't forget it. It remains in my head.
Yeah.
So it means that I can remember something I read years ago and bring it together with something I've just read and put the two things together in one way or another, which is a useful thing to be able to do. But going back, one of the papers I read was discussing about the neurochemical, what happens in the brain at the point of death, and what happens to consciousness, what creates the near-death experience. And I discovered something fascinating. I discovered that it's particularly related at that time the work was being done. The associations were being made with a particular chemical in the brain, a neurotransmitter in the brain called glutamate. And glutamate is the major neurotransmitter in the brain of mammals. And basically, a neurotransmitter is a chemical that facilitates communication between the neurons of the brain. Okay. Now, I then discovered something quite strange because, as I said, I was interested in the panoramic life review and the memories that are involved in the panoramic life review. But I also discovered that people who experience something called temporal lobe epilepsy have powerful memory experiences. And it's facilitated by glutamate. And I thought there's a definite link here. Whatever this substance is, it seems to be the thing that facilitates everything. And then I started looking into glutamate and everything.
Yeah.
And I then had the most curious thing happen. I got a phone call one afternoon. I was living in Horsham in West Sussex at the time, just down the road from here. And I get a phone call one afternoon, and it's from a recruitment agency. And the lady in the recruitment agency, I always call her Margaret. It's not her real name, but you'll find out why in a second. And she phoned me up and she said, "Tony, I may have a business contract for you. Would you be interested in work, going back to work? I presume you've finished one of your business contracts. Are you doing another one?" And I said, "Well, at the moment I'm writing a book and I'm taking a year out, so I'm not available." And she turned around to me and she said, "Oh, what are you writing about?" As a lot of people do. And I said, "Well, I'm not sure where I'm going at the moment. There's a lot of strings I'm following, but I'm particularly interested in near-death experiences. And I'm now discovering a lot about temporal lobe epilepsy and the hallucinations people have when they experience temporal lobe epilepsy." And she went really quiet. And she said, "Can we meet up?" And I said, "Yeah." So she arranged to meet for me for a coffee a week later. And we met at one of the airport hotels around Gatwick Airport. And I met her and she sat down and she said, "The reason I couldn't talk to you was I was in the office." And she said, "And I don't want people to know this, but the things you were saying were resonating with me because I've been diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy." And I said, wow, really? And she said, and the things you were saying were extraordinary. And I said, well, can you tell me what happened when you first realized? And she said it was the most extraordinary experience. She said she was at a business client, and she was in the canteen of the business client. And the business client went up and bought them cups of coffee so they could discuss the vacancy they were going to discuss. And she said, as my friend, the business associate, the other side of the table, was about to explain to me the vacancy, suddenly there's a snap above my left ear. And I looked at her and she'd stopped moving. She was frozen. And so Margaret's going there going, what the hell is going on here? And then she could hear this humming sound all around her, this kind of low resonant sound.
Yeah.
And then she looked at the woman and she realized that she wasn't frozen. She was moving incredibly slowly. And she watched, and she said, I watched as she poured the tea. Incredibly slowly. I saw the tea come out. I saw it hit the surface of the tea as it filled up. I saw the surface tension and everything, and it plopping into it. And she then realized, and this is extraordinary, she realized the humming sound was people talking. Her metabolism had slowed down to such an extent that people's noises, when you slow down somebody's voice, it goes,
Yeah.
And it was like that. And she turned around to me and she said something profoundly important, because she turned around and she said, I don't know how long I was away, whether it was days, weeks, years, or a whole lifetime, watching this woman pouring this tea. Yeah. And then she said, after what seemed like forever, there's another snap over my ear, and the woman sits back and goes, are you okay? And she said, as far as the woman was concerned, she had been away for a split second. She had stared at her for a split second. Now, she then was so worried, she thought she'd had a stroke or whatever. She goes to the doctors, series of exercises done, and she was diagnosed with a particular form of epilepsy called temporal lobe epilepsy, which is located in the temporal lobes around the ears. Okay. Now, I then made a click, because I thought, you know what? I know something about I research in temporal lobe epilepsy here. And I said, do you get deja vu sensations? And she said, wow, how do you know that? She said, I get the most unbelievable sensations, particularly just before I have a seizure. Now, when people have what they're generally known as absence seizures, so when somebody has a temporal lobe seizure, what they'll do is you're talking to them and they'll suddenly just go like she did. They'll go,
yeah.
And then they'll come back. But they've been away for hours, weeks, years, or whatever. And she said to me, she said, I get, when you have a seizure, but before you have a seizure, you have what's called the aura state. And it's called a prodrome. It's a kind of a symptom or a warning that you're going to have a temporal lobe seizure.
Yeah.
And these normally involve really weird sensations. Now, I know of these because I myself suffer from an allied subject experience called classical migraine. And I get aura states, and I know when I'm going to get a migraine, say aura states. But she said that one of the big clues she knows she's going to get it is she gets incredible deja vus, powerful deja vus, where she knows what's going to happen next. It's not just a recognition, which is, of course, what deja vus are. It's an actual realization you have lived this moment before at some indeterminate part in your past, which is the technical definition for deja vus, which came up, which was suggested by a guy called Vernon Neppe, Professor Vernon Neppe, many, many years ago, who wrote the classic book on deja vu. So I then became really intrigued by this, because I thought there must be a link between temporal lobe epilepsy, deja vu, time slowing down, and thinking that you are reliving your life again. Mm-hmm. Now, again, this is a fascinating story, and I rarely discuss this, so this is going to be interesting for you. People who live in the Northwest, in the Liverpool area, may know there is a shopping centre outside Liverpool near Peake Airport called the Peake Shopping Centre. And I was doing, when I moved back up to Wirral, when my first book came out, I've been contacted by tens of thousands of people from around the world. And one of the ladies that had contacted me was the lady who was the president of the Epilepsy Association in the UK. And she lived in Liverpool, Jane. And one day Jane arranges to meet me at the Borders bookstore at Peake Airport, near Peake Airport.
Yeah.
And now the Borders bookstore there was really fascinating because it has a mezzanine floor at the back where there was a Costa's Coffee. So there's the down here, you have all the books, and then there's a staircase going up at the back, and there's a mezzanine floor which you can look out at the entrance of the shop. So she turns up and she meets me, and she said, "I'm sorry I'm a little bit late, but as you know, because I have temporal lobe epilepsy, I can't drive. So I've left my son and his friend in the city centre in Liverpool, and I got the bus that's 6 miles out here to meet you." So she said, "I will be going back to Liverpool city centre to meet him in a couple of hours' time." And I said, "Okay, that's interesting." She goes up, and again, she buys a cup of coffee, and she sits down next to me, and she's talking, and suddenly she stops, and she goes into an absence seizure right in front of me. She's staring at me like that. And I'll never forget this. She then went, and it was almost like the head moving in the Exorcist movie. And she went over like this, in this blank state, eyes completely not seeing anything.
Yeah.
And she looks out towards the entrance of the bookshop. And she says in this incredibly robotic voice, and she goes, "He shouldn't be here. There's no way he should be here. This is ridiculous. He should not be here." And then she went, "Oh," like that. And she looked at me, and I said, "You've just had an absence." And I got as far as the word seizure.
Yeah.
And she looks over in exactly the same way to the entrance. And she sees her son and his friend walk in. And she said exactly the same words. I had witnessed a precognition, a deja vu precognition. Now, I know that happened. And this was, to me, the most extraordinary piece of evidence ever. I'd seen that people, when they go into deja vu states, have precognitions. Absolute fact. Now, the question is, if they have these precognitions, where do those precognitions come from? Where was that information in her brain? Now, I was doing a radio program on BBC Radio Merseyside at that time. I used to do a fortnight show with a guy called Billy Butler. And every fortnight, I'd pick a topic and we'd have people phone in, on BBC. One of the weeks, I decided to do a talk on deja vu and explain, which I'll explain to you later, how the rules and what they think deja vu is. And a guy phones in, out the blue, Scouse guy, and he phones in and he said, "For the first time in my life, I'm hearing somebody on the radio who's explained something that happened to him and happened to him a few months before." And he explained on live radio. And he said what happened was he was watching the TV with his wife. And again, he felt really strange. And I think he was going into kind of either a migraine aura or something. And he said he realized that he was hearing the person speaking on the television speaking twice. They'd speak and then they'd speak again, saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And he got so disturbed by this, he got up and he walked out the room. As he said, as he walked out the room, he had a glass front door, and he said somebody walked past the door, and they walked past again. Now, do you remember in the movie The Matrix, there's the sequence with the cat? I don't know if you know, in the Matrix. Is it Matrix? Yeah, it is the Matrix, isn't it? Where the cat,
I think is it the second one?
Yeah, it could be, where there's the cat and the cat moves twice and they see it and they realize they're changing the program. He said he described something almost exactly like that. But what was really weird was he then said, but he realized he could prove he was being precognitive. And what he did was, and this is astonishing, he waited outside the door of the living room, and he waited until in his mind, he heard what his wife said when he walked into the room, and he wrote it down on a piece of paper, folded it, walked in. She said the words, he handed her the piece of paper. That's with the exact words. And again, to me, absolute proof. So the thing is, we can, under certain circumstances, see the contents of our immediate future. Now, the question is, how? What is it that knows? And this is my writing, and this is where my writing then went. And I believe we're all living our lives again. Deja vu is exactly what it feels like. We are living in a simulation, or technically an instantation. A computer, like an equivalent of a computer program of our lives. If you experience deja vu, and 70% of humanity do, at least once in their life, the research is quite precise on this, 30% of people don't. I believe this is because the 70% who experience deja vus are living their lives again. You are living in a virtual reality simulation of your life, created by your brain in the final seconds of your life. And you live that life over and over and over again. And this, if you look, so many movies talk about this concept. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Vanilla Sky. In Vanilla Sky, the main character, David Ames, is Tom Cruise.
I think I've seen it. I'm just trying to remember which one it is.
It's the one, it's based upon a Spanish film called Open Your Eyes. And Tom Cruise was determined to buy the rights to it from the Spanish film company. The reason being that he's a Scientologist, and Scientologists are interested in a lot of this kind of weird fringe stuff.
Yeah.
Now, Cruise bought the rights and he made this movie and he called it Vanilla Sky. And it's called Vanilla Sky for a very particular reason, because he's living his life again. And where his old life ceases and his new life starts, the sky becomes vanilla color. And if you watch the movie, you'll see that as the sky moves. Now, the fascinating thing about Vanilla Sky is the final sequence. Okay. And this again relates to my work. In the final sequence of Vanilla Sky, if you watch it, there is Tom Cruise, who's the main character, called David Ames, and he's on the top of a skyscraper. And his psychiatrist is there, Kurt Russell, and his girlfriend, Penelope Cruz. And they're on the roof. By the way, Penelope Cruz played the same character in the original Spanish version as well. So she played both.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think I'm right in saying that. Anyway, I'm sure I am. So anyway, what he decides is that he realizes this is an illusion. It's a game. It's an illusion he's stuck within.
Yeah.
So he decides that what he's going to do. Oh yeah, before that, in the movie, there is a sequence where he's in a bar. And this is again really strange. It shows that I'd argue that I created my book through seeing these movies in many ways in my own future. Because there's a sequence in the film where he is in a bar and there is problems with the program. And a person from outside the program is sent into the program to talk to him, to warn him about not doing something. And as they're talking, this guy's talking to him and he's trying to explain to him and he's saying, this is not what it seems. And Tom Cruise turns around to this character and said, "Oh, shut the F up."
Yeah.
And suddenly everybody freezes around him, just like happened with my friend, with Margaret. Literally everybody freezes around him. And he turns around to this guy and he said, "How did you do that?" And he said, "It's a simulation. We can play with the simulation." So in the final sequence, again, if you watch it, and again, if you've got it on DVD, do this because it's fascinating to watch. The film was directed by a guy called Cameron Crowe. And Cameron Crowe wanted to get the idea of how life is a recording. And what he did was he has Tom Cruise commit suicide. He has him jump off the building. And as he's flying down, they're playing the wonderful music of the band Sigarios, the Icelandic band, which really haunting music. And he's flying down like this. Now, when you've got the DVD, freeze frame it at that point.
Yeah.
Just go frame to frame to frame. And you'll suddenly notice something extraordinary. It's a series of photographs that you see on the screen. And there's somebody's life from the moment they're born to the moment they die.
Right.
It's the panoramic life review. He is actually placed within the movie, a sequence that you will not see unless you freeze frame it. And these are sequences from Cameron Crowe's own life. So I'm sitting here when I'm watching these movies and everything, I am convinced, I know I'm right. I know I'm right because so many people subliminally know this. It's as if it's something that we bury deep inside ourselves, but it erupts sometimes in fiction, in music, in movies. And to me, literally, I think the concept of cheating the Fremen is ultra powerful because I can explain everything, and I mean everything, from out-of-body experiences to near-death experiences to alien encounters to alien abductions. I do the neurology of it. I do the psychology of it. I do the science of it. I do the quantum mechanics of it. I do the cosmology of it. I even know how the simulation is processed. It's processed using, it's to do with black holes, and it's to do with how information works, and everything in its basics is information. I'm sorry, when I go on, I get on
No, it's fine. Honestly, I'm just writing a few things down because there's a lot of stuff that you said. I've had weird things go on, and I just wanted to run a couple by you, if that's okay.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
So, sorry, 1 second. The first one was I used to listen to Radio 1, not anymore. I've grown up since then. But I was in Bedfordshire, either Ampthill or Flitwick. I always get mixed up with the two because you come out of one, you're in the other, so whatever. So I'm driving along, and the news comes on, and they start talking about something that had occurred, and I'm like, this happened. I can't remember if it's like 3 or 4 months ago or 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm sat in the van, and it's like, and I'm knowing what they're going to say before they say it. And this story, it's like, why am I having some sort of relapse or something? There's definitely something going on. And I couldn't work out what it was. You know, you go all a bit like discombobulated.
Yeah.
It was that. So I thought, right, I better pull up because I need to work out what exactly is going on. Anyway, I'm coming up to this little roundabout. There's a shower garage on the left. It's not a small one, just like single lane on all four. And I'm going over to the other side because I know I can pull in there. But as I'm coming up to the roundabout, everything in front, well, not everything, but a lot of things in front of me started glitching. Not quite Matrix. It went all the binary, the zeros and ones. It was very similar to that. I'm like, what the? Yeah, you can imagine my response. I thought I was having some sort of seizure. And that only lasted like probably 2 seconds, if that. I'm like, what the hell has just happened? And then I said, eventually I pulled in and I was like, Joe, when you're just going through it, like, did it happen? Did it not happen? Am I just imagining it? But it's like, no, because what they were saying on the news, how did I know exactly what had happened, where it had happened, the names of the people involved? Maybe I didn't know that, but the people involved in everything that went on. It's like, why is it coming back out now? Why are they only just talking about it now? And then nothing more of that I can recall. It was just that moment.
Wow, this is wonderful, isn't it? It's when you're not necessarily fully aware of my work, and suddenly I tell you something, and suddenly you've experienced it.
Right.
Now, these things happen. They are so common. They happen a lot. I get usually every week I'll get 15 or 20 messages from people around the world that have had these experiences, and they are technically inexplicable. So what they do is they come up with what I call the labeling theory of science. And the labeling theory is basically, if you do not understand an experience, you call it an hallucination. Now, hallucinations, nobody knows what causes hallucinations. Nobody. No scientist knows, no neurologist knows, because no neurologist even knows how consciousness is created by the brain, how self-referential consciousness is created by the brain. So they're all stuck in this word, one of my favorite words, hubris. It's false pretending you know things. And I have another thing. I call it idiomatic science, in the sense that it's the idea that they don't really know, but they pretend they do by giving labels. So preferably Latin or Greek normally makes it sound really, really clever. Now, you will find, for example, that when people, one of my favorite examples of this, that when people hallucinate on their own, it's an hallucination, it's brain generated, and it's something that's not really out there. That's the definition. However, if two people hallucinate the same thing, and it does happen, it's then called a folie à deux, which is French, a folly of two people. And the scientific explanation for this, get this, the scientific explanation for this, it's a form of telepathy, that the two people are kind of linked by
Right.
telepathy. But modern science doesn't accept telepathy. So they're quite happy to use something they don't believe in to explain something they don't believe in even more. It is that
Yeah.
level of patheticness. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a folie à deux when two people, and when a lot of people do it, it's a collective hallucination. Like, for instance, in Fatima in 1917, when the children saw when the sun span in the sky, thousands and thousands of people saw that.
Yeah.
So it was out there. So the question is, were they all communicating with each other using telepathy, or is there something more? And the answer is there is something more. And again, most people who really research, not the skeptics, but the real researchers, the real scientists who are doing the real research that I work with on a regular basis. These scientists in 1995, 96, I think it was, a young Australian philosopher called David Chalmers stood up at the University of Arizona. They have an annual conference there on consciousness. Yeah. And he stood up and he said, there are two problems with modern science. The first is the soft problem of science. It's understanding how the brain works, how the neurochemicals work, how the sections work within the brain. Then there is the hard problem. And the hard problem is, how is Andy created out of all your hopes, your fears, your dreams, your experiences, your memories are all created in the basic level by chemicals reacting in electrical fields. Now, those chemicals are ultimately made up of atoms and molecules, which are dead. They're inanimate. They're not alive, but they somehow can magically come together in such a configuration, and suddenly consciousness just spontaneously, bang, it just appears magically. In fact, they have a term called epiphenomenalism, which is the idea that when things get a certain level of complexity, they become conscious, but they have no idea how that even begins to work, because consciousness and thought are non-physical, are they? You can't open your head up, take your brain apart and find a thought, because it's not how it works. They will argue, oh yes, but we can actually, using fMRI scans and using various things, we can measure which part of the brain fires up. Yeah. But that's the map, not the territory. That's telling us all that what the brain is doing to process this information. So it is so important to step back. Now, the hard problem, he said, was how this happens, how everything we are aware of happens within the brain, because a lot of people believe that what is out there is real. There is a real world out there, and it's physical and it's solid, and you can walk in it and you can feel it. Well, you can't actually. I posted something recently on Facebook, and also it's something I've used for years and years and years. You never, ever touch anything. When you think you're touching the surface of a table, you're not. You're feeling what's called electrostatic repulsion. You're not touching it. Do you remember when you were a kid and you had a magnet and you had the two negative sides of the magnet, different poles? Yeah. You put the same poles together, they repulse, don't they? They won't come together. This is what happens in reality, because the end of your fingers, and in fact, the edges of the atoms at the end of your fingers, there's tiny little bits of energy called electrons whizzing round, and electrons are negatively charged. And the table you're touching, or the chair you're sitting on now, is also that's configured in exactly the same way, which means the outer edge of the atoms are actually electrons which are negatively charged. Now, if you put something negative against something negative, they repulse. Yeah. And that's what is happening. You are feeling the electrostatic repulsion. You are not feeling the table surface. You never touch anything. Not only that, and it's important this point is made here as well, that when you look at the outside world, to believe that what you're seeing is what is exactly out there is called naive realism, because neurologists know that this is not the case. Your brain is creating an internal model of what it thinks the external world is. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Not only that, but there are no colors out there. Colors don't exist. There's no color red. People
No.
go on this, like you look at a red rose and you look at the color red, but the red is nowhere. I use the analogy again because I love movies. In the movie Schindler's List,
Yes.
it's a black and white movie, with the exception of the little girl in the red coat. If you remember that sequence,
Oh, it's
you
years
see
ago when I've seen it.
oh, it's a horrific. It's very well done. There's a group of people walking on. There's this little beautiful little girl in a red coat, and it's the only bit in the whole film that's in color. And the reason it is that if you watch the movie later on, there's a pile of dead bodies of people that have been put to death, and you see within the side of the dead bodies a sliver of red. And it's her coat. And they were trying to get across the idea of the horror of the Holocaust and everything. Very, very cleverly done. But I argue in one of my books, where is the red that you see there? It would originally would have been in the red of the coat when they did the filming first, when it was in normal color. But that's not where the red is, because the red is then transferred into film tape. And the red is then on the film screen or on the video. But the red's not there either. The red is literally a particular vibrational state of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, in one of my books, I argue, and I try to get this idea across to people. And I say, imagine the electromagnetic spectrum, which is basically visible light is just part. And it's everything from radio waves to gamma rays. So from the super energetic to the very long and slow, the radio waves are long and slow. Imagine that is a kind of like a river. Imagine, in fact, it is the Mississippi River. And the Mississippi starts in a tiny little lake in Minnesota and winds its way down through the center of America, the United States, and it comes out in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, imagine that's the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah.
What we believe is the visual world is 1.5 inches, about 8 miles south of Hannibal, Missouri. Everything else in the electromagnetic spectrum, which if our eyes were attuned to it, we could see, we can't see. We are blind to it. So that is the tiny bit. And of that spectrum bit, there's a tiny, tiny section, which is the color red.
Yeah.
And the only reason we see red or green or blue or any other color is because our brain interprets that vibrational state to be red.
Yes.
It's no color. It has no color. It's a vibration. There is no color in a vibration. It's how our brain interprets it. So therefore, everything you see is not what you think it is. Not only that, are you aware, I was using about the table, and you tap the table.
Yeah.
That table, atoms, now I'll give an example of an atom, for instance, is made up, a table's made up of atoms. The hydrogen atom is 99.9999999999996 empty space.
Oh,
okay.
Right. Yeah.
That's how much space there is in the atom. Now, within the atom, then you have a tiny little bit in the center called the nucleus, and you have what I was talking about, these electrons whizzing round the edges. The actual bit that's solid in there, if you break that down, it breaks down. The nucleus is made up of a proton, and I can't remember what the other thing is there, and the neutron and the proton.
Yeah.
They are in turn made up of even smaller things called quarks.
Right.
Okay. And the electron and quarks are what are called point particles. Now, it's very important to understand what a point particle is. It has no extension in space. It's so tiny, however much you look in, it's still just a point.
Yeah.
So what we have is countless numbers of these tiny points of nothing make up the nucleus of the atom. Then the atom itself is mostly empty space, which then makes the tables, the chairs, the trees, the atmosphere around you, your computer in front of you, but it's made of nothing. There's nothing there. Now, on top of this, and it gets even weirder, is the reason you are seeing things at the moment is because tiny little bits of energy called photons are hitting your eye. Now, photons are incredibly, again, are point particles. You know, the point particle, however much you cannot get to them. Now, photons, get this, they have no extension in space. They have zero mass, so they have no weight.
Yeah.
And they can only travel at the speed of light. Okay. They can't go any slower than the speed of light. Now, what we know from Einstein of what happens when you travel at the speed of light, time stops. There is no time. So the things that are making you see the world around you are literally these tiny objects that don't really exist, bouncing off objects and coming in and hitting your eye. And what they do is they come into, what happens is trillions of these little things come into your eyes through your pupil, and then they go through the aqueous humor. I won't even go into the fact that the photons themselves are not the same photon. They keep hitting other atoms and giving off more energy. Hit. That gets even more complex. so these things, they hit, just imagine it's the same photon, goes in and it hits at the back of your eye. There's something called the retina. And the retina is light sensitive, like the film on a camera. Now it's postage stamp sized, and the image that hits the retina is inverted. So the image that's hitting your eye at the moment is postage stamp sized, bent, and upside down.
Yeah.
That is then converted into an electrochemical impulse, which goes from the back of your eye to your visual cortex at the back of your head.
Yeah.
And there, your brain takes this postage stamp image that's inverted and upside down, made up of these little particles that don't really exist, and it creates your visual field. Now, look out your eyes now. You are seeing a visual field all around you. It's all around you and everything, but it's been created by an inverted postage stamp image. And it's been created internally by your brain. So your brain is interpreting the colors. Your brain is deciding that that particular vibration I'm going to interpret as blue or green or indigo or whatever. So suddenly we realize that what we think is real isn't. It's not. It's energy. It's mathematics. It's digital information. And I think I'm one of the few writers in the world that's linking this to near-death experiences, to alien abductions. As you know, I speak every year now in Southern California at Contact in the Desert. This year I'll be speaking on near-death experiences, by the way. But this is, the man in the street is just not aware of just how bloody weird the word is. And you get people like Brian Cox turning around and saying, you know, oh, we know everything. We know it all. We've got it all sussed. And anybody that believes in psychic phenomenon or UFOs or anything is a complete nerd. Do you know his book that he wrote with a guy called Jeff Forshaw? The subtitle of that is Everything That Happens Does Happen, because he's aware of something called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Right.
He knows that the implications of quantum mechanics tells us that there are trillions and trillions and trillions of universes, all of which have versions of us in them, all having slightly different lives.
Yeah.
He knows this. In fact, I met with Jeff Forshaw. Jeff and I did an event about 15 years ago at the National Theatre in London. Yeah. Jeff Forshaw is Brian Cox's PhD tutor. Okay. And he's one of the world's leading authorities in cosmology and quantum mechanics. And we sat having coffee, and over coffee at Manchester University, Jeff turns around to me and he said, of course, we now know that every electron knows the location of every other electron in the universe. This is real science. You know, we're now in the position we have particles where we put two subatomic particles in the same quantum state and send them off in different directions, and they communicate instantaneously. You do one thing to one particle, the other one reacts instantaneously. It's called superposition.
Right.
It means that effectively what we think is even space and distance, there isn't. There is no space between things. And of course, again, I'm getting carried away here, but
it's okay.
Space and time are the same thing. Do you know that?
No, but
Okay.
I'm just trying to get my head around it all. It's something that I have been like talking to people like yourself, and everyone like you're talking about this. Then I'll remember what one of the other guests, like Agnos, he spoke about quantum physics and quantum mathematics and that, and little bits and pieces that he said, and then it's me trying to get an understanding of it all and link it all together so I know what's going on.
The
That's the hard
difficulty is
bit.
there's a guy called Richard Feynman, who was probably the greatest quantum physicist of the late 20th century. And the first thing he used to say to his students when they started their postdoctoral or their doctoral research into quantum mechanics, and he said, don't ever think you can understand quantum mechanics. Don't ever think you can logically, rationally understand what's going on, because you'll fall down a hole that you'll never escape from. All we know is our brains cannot comprehend fully the implications of quantum mechanics because we're not programmed to understand them. And I think it's because our brains are programmed to exist in this simulation. So we got instantation. So we can't, we all we see are the effects of them.
Yeah.
You know, we know, for instance, that Einstein made a very famous phrase. I think it was in 1937 when he turned around and he didn't like the way quantum mechanics was going. There's something called the Copenhagen interpretation. And he turned around and he said, I do not believe that the moon doesn't exist if I don't look at it. He was proven wrong. The moon does not exist if it's not looked at. And this is so profoundly important. It's something called the collapse of the wave function. Before an object, a subatomic particle, is measured, it doesn't exist. It exists as what's called a statistical wave. It literally can be anywhere in the universe. And when it is measured, it collapses from this mathematical field into a point particle in a particular location. But before then, it's nowhere. But the act of measurement, many people argue, actually is the act of observation. The act of a consciousness looking at something is what brings it into existence.
Right.
So in which case coming down right to it, it effectively means we are co-creating the universe around us. That's the only solution that can be made from the understanding of modern quantum mechanics. They do not, for instance, another thing that I love pointing out to people, you know, by the way, the skeptics avoid me like the plague. They do not like me at all. I have been invited on 4 occasions to skeptics groups at universities because they think they're going to get some kind of nut job that believes in ghosts and all this weird stuff. They all back down because they check me out and they go, oh. You know, as I say to them, you want to talk Heisenberg's uncertainty principle? I can talk to you about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Pauli's exclusion principle. I know these things, you know, I make it my business to know them. So they can't talk down at me about it. So the thing is that they don't understand. Like, for instance, there are 2 areas of understanding of the universe at the moment. There's the very big and the very small. The very big is basically Einstein's relativity theories, and the very small is quantum mechanics. They are all mathematical. They're all worked on Schrodinger's equation and everything else. You know, these are the equations they use. But the interesting thing is, the 2 areas of maths don't work. So if you plug in the maths that you use for quantum mechanics into relativity, you get what's called infinities. The maths doesn't work. So we have 2 parts of the same reality with completely different mathematical understandings of them. So this has to be telling scientists that what really is happening is here. We've not got the answers yet. We've got this bit of information, this bit of it, but underneath there is something which Einstein called the hidden variables. The idea that at a deeper level of reality, it all will come together again.
Yeah. Because
we're in total confusion. You know, that to turn around and say that we understand modern science, we don't.
No.
96, you know, that 94% of the universe is missing.
No, but I do now.
Okay, 94% of the universe is missing. The reason they know this is really fascinating. This, I think it was a lady called Vera Rubin. I think, oh, it could have been Rosalind Franklin. I'm never sure. I got the two muddled up.
Right.
But what they do is, when you look at a photograph of, say, the Andromeda Galaxy.
Yeah.
Okay. So imagine it. It's going round and round like a big Catherine wheel.
Yeah.
The problem is that the masses of gas and the stars on the outside are traveling slower. I think it's slower than the ones inside, further in. Now, because it's moving round, the centrifugal force and everything, which means it should be dragged out, but it isn't. And they realized this many years ago, and they thought this isn't possible. So they concluded the only way they could understand how galaxies are happening, or galaxies are evolving in the way they do, is that there is another form of matter that we cannot see that's in galaxies. And they calculated that is about 90% or something of the whole mass of the galaxy is missing. The only way they can explain how it's moving. Then they discovered something else called dark energy, which is the same. It's a form of energy that we know is there, but we don't know what it is. So suddenly the visual universe and the physical universe is only 6% of what is really out there. And we know it's out there. We just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But again, the man in the street is not aware of this. And most of the skeptics aren't aware of this because they don't invest. They only go so far. So like I said earlier on, when they turn around and say, oh, somebody gets abducted by aliens and it's an hallucination. Wow. Yeah, fine. There's a very famous British psychiatrist called Oliver Sacks. And he died a few years ago. One of the books, his last book, was called Hallucinations. And it was profoundly influential on me because he argues that nobody knows what hallucinations are. Nobody can even begin to understand. Because in the final analysis, this is an hallucination because everything's brain generated. So what we're experiencing now is an hallucination. I mean, for instance, again, once I get in a run here, but, think for a second. You dream. You have a dream. In dreams, there's a story. There is a plot. Who's putting that plot together? You're not.
Nope. Or
but you have a dream. And in a dream, you see things. You see shadows. Where's the light? Where's the illumination in a dream? If you see a shadow in a dream, where's the light coming from? And I argue that light is a particular form of light called bioluminescence. And it's the light given off by the cells of the body in one way or another. And this all links right back to a substance that's been discovered in the brain called dimethyltryptamine.
Yep. DMT.
Yeah.
See, because I talk a lot about this, and we've had people on that have done and do DMT and talk about hallucinogenics and how the brain creates it. But with you saying, like, if we're creating this as we're walking and talking and doing what we do, then it's a manifestation. Yeah. So it obviously a manifestation has to start at the thought process. It has to be a thought before it can become anything physical. That's if it does become physical. So with with saying about hallucinations, could the hallucinations be the start of a manifestation, either from an hallucinogenic caused by DMT or by some other brain-related chemical, and it's just causing it? And like you said, it doesn't exist unless you're looking at it. Now, and going back to the moon, see, the moon gets me all the time. Just there's loads of stuff on it that doesn't add up. It might just be my own thought process. I don't know. I'll go out some clear night. Yeah, last few nights it's been clear in Northampton. I'm not seeing the moon, and I've been out like looking at stars, taking photographs. Then say tonight I'll go out and it'll be a small crescent. Yeah, quite distant. I'll go out tomorrow around the same time where the moon will be in its position, and it'll be twice the size of what it was. So
Well, this is it. Is one of the great mysteries is that, you know, when you see the moon, when it's nearer the horizon, it looks bigger.
yeah,
And
yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
again because that's how your brain is interpreting the information. So yet again, your brain is creating a larger moon because it's referencing the things around it,
Yeah,
which
perspective
means the
view.
moon can look larger, can look smaller. But for instance, one of the things, again, that's intrigued me since I was a child, when I was interested in astronomy, is that the moon is 800 times smaller in area than the visual sun.
Yes.
Okay. And yet when you have a total eclipse, the moon completely perfectly occludes the sun.
Yeah.
And it's because the moon is 800 times closer to the earth and the sun is 800 times. It's something like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the point of the matter is, there is no other satellite known in the solar system that has the same relationship to the earth as the moon does in terms of eclipses. Now,
Yeah.
that has only been happening for, I think, the last 5,000 years. Before
Right.
then, because the moon would have moved slightly, either further out or further in,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
means that eclipses before then wouldn't look like the eclipses we see now. So the question has to be, statistically, what is the chances of the moon and the apparent size of the moon and the apparent size of the sun being identical while consciousnesses exist on this planet to observe that?
Mm.
You know, the idea of, well, why is it? And that then brings us into something even more extraordinary called the cosmic anthropic principle, which is that so many things are fine-tuned to the evolution of life and sentient beings on this planet since the first femtosecond of the Big Bang. Even little things as to why life has evolved on this planet.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, water is something we need. Water is the only liquid that freezes from the top downwards.
Yeah.
You always get the freezing at the top and there's water
Yeah.
underneath. If it was the other way around, there wouldn't be water in vast areas of this planet and humanity wouldn't have even started and life probably wouldn't have started.
Yeah.
The balance between certain subatomic particles was so fine that had it been slightly in one direction or the other, the planets wouldn't have formed. You know, so either the universe got it right first time. If there's only ever been one universe and one Big Bang, the universe got it right, absolutely perfect, first time for the evolution of sentient beings on this planet.
Yeah.
That is one argument, which is statistically ridiculously impossible. Or the more logical conclusion is we are one of trillions and trillions of universes, and we happen to live in the one where life evolved. Because that's the only argument you can use. You can't have both. Then you have the idea of, as I was saying before, the relationship between your intentions. You know, your point was an incredibly valid one. And in my book, The Hidden Universe, I suggest a way that works, and I call it the egregorial and egregores. And I argue that we are co-creating this reality by our anticipations.
Yeah.
We don't know we're doing it. You know, we can't control it. I don't believe in the law of attraction and all that nonsense. But definitely there is a linkage between what we anticipate is going to happen and what takes place. And I think we all, by observing, we are all co-creating this reality and drawing it into reality in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And we are doing this collectively. And I call this kind of this collective creation of everything egregorial science. Because I have in one of my recent books, I have a whole list of things that were discovered by people who anticipated finding them.
Right. Yeah.
In other words, we think of something and it comes into existence. Now, if there are quantum physicists out there, you know, that really know their stuff, you will know of this case. A guy called E. Raby, who was a Nobel Prize winner. Him and his team were looking for various subatomic particles, which they concluded that they're probably there.
Yeah.
And one day they discovered a subatomic particle called the muon. And when they discovered it, E. Rabi walked into the laboratory and said, "Who ordered that?" As if, because they were thinking about it, it was then there.
Yeah.
Einstein's cosmological constant was a mathematical fudge he put in to one of his mathematical structures in order to explain the things he saw. He made it up, but it exists. It now exists. They now know it is an exist mathematical form. He made it up. Max Planck, when he discovered quantum mechanics, he came up with it with a number of ideas. But as he said, when he discovered the quantum nature of energy, he actually said in his biography, it was an act of desperation. He suddenly thought, how can I make all this work mathematically from what people are observing? And he turned around and he said, the only way I can get around this is that energy comes in. Energy is not continual. It comes in little packets or quanta. That's what quantum means, by the way. Quanta is from the Latin for package.
Right.
And quantum physics is basically the idea that energy is not continual. It comes in little bits or little packages.
Yeah.
And this was an ability to explain some of the really weird things that they were observing in the 1890s that they couldn't explain using their modern science. And he managed to sort it out. And in December 1900, he sat up and made a talk at the University of Berlin. And he changed science forever. But most people's knowledge of science and their understanding of science is their school day science, which is science of 125 years ago. That's not been current for 125 years, the way science works, how they think science works. So it seems that, the act of this is why Schrodinger's cat is such a famous thought experiment, because Schrödinger was trying to prove that there wasn't a thought affecting the behavior of subatomic particles. This is why he did the experiment. Without going into detail. And because of that, and something called the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen EPR paradox, which 1937 Einstein came up with to disprove the idea that the moon was there when you looked at it.
Yeah.
He was proven wrong. He put up this arch theory to prove that consciousness and thought and ability and observation doesn't bring the real world into existence, with this thing called the EPR paradox. In 1964, an Irish mathematician called John Bell did the maths to disprove Einstein, that reality is not really out there. Then in 1981, a guy called Alain Aspect, Roger and Dalibard, who were three researchers at the Paris University Institute of Optics in Paris, actually created an experiment that proved Einstein wrong. But most people aren't aware of this.
No.
And they're not aware of it because it is so counterintuitive. It is so weird. And I believe this is where aliens come from. Aliens we create because we expect them. And we expect them in a particular way. I was talking to Whitley Strieber about this last summer. Like, for instance, when I was at Contact in the Desert last year, a group of people went outside and they were looking for UFOs and they saw one. A nuts and bolts UFO flew over them. And then 10 minutes later flew over them again. Nobody else saw them. Nobody else in the town saw them, but they saw it. Again, a collective hallucination brought about by them anticipating. But the weirdest thing, and you're going to love this one. I did a talk at in Southend a few months ago. And I was talking about aliens, and I was talking about the way thought forms can be brought into existence, tulpas and everything else as well. And a lady came over to me. She said, like people say to me an awful lot, and it's always very nice when I hear, and she'll say, my God, I've never heard anything like this. You've explained all my experiences. And she said, but can you explain this? And she showed me a phone. And she'd filmed on her phone a line of UFOs flying down the Thames estuary. 6 or 7 UFOs, and the one was flicking from the front to the back. It looked like Skylink, only it wasn't, because it was actually low level. It was below the horizon. And she's filming it, and you can hear her going, "This is really odd." And she's talking to somebody else in the room. And then she thinks, as I did, maybe it was a marker reflection on the window. So she goes up and she opens the window and she continues filming, and the objects are still there.
Yeah.
And then she turns around to her friend, who's the other person there, and said, "Can you see that?" And the other woman couldn't see anything. And then she looks at the film she'd made, and she said to me, she said, "How can this be? I saw these objects. The camera saw these objects on my phone, but my friend who was standing next to me didn't see them." And they didn't see them because they were not in their universe. They were not in their worldview. They wouldn't see them because they're not there for them. Whereas it showed on a camera, and a camera is just a device. It's a coupling device that actually just looks at the photons and makes a picture.
Yeah.
But clearly her anticipation was so strong, she'd imposed it on the camera and the imagery on the camera. This is the power of thought.
Yes.
And we need to realize that our power of thought is incredibly powerful. Like, for instance, I've long been fascinated about alien entities. What really are they? How is it that they seem to mock us? They seem to play with us. And then you realize that the alien entities that people experience in abduction cases are identical to the aliens that are encountered in DMT trips. Which they are, because I'm working with a number of my associates are doing some fascinating work with DMT legally at various universities down here at the moment. And some of the experiments and some of the things they are discovering will make your blood freeze cold.
Wow.
And these are actual researchers. These aren't paranormal investigators, in raised commas. These are post PhD researchers in neuroscience. Okay. So, anybody out there turning around and saying, "Oh, this is nonsense," check out the Imperial College work they're doing. Check out the work that Anil Seth is doing at the University of Sussex before it's dismissed. Okay. So the stuff here is extraordinary. I mean, for instance, this is again, you'll love this one. There's a friend of mine who is one of the volunteers, university lecturer. And he's one of the volunteers at the research that's been done at Imperial College in London with intravenous DMT. The volunteers taking DMT under control conditions in a laboratory, and they're reporting back the experiences they're having. Okay, so my friend Carl, he's one of the researchers. He works with the researchers, goes into the DMT state, finds himself in the DMT state, and this alien comes over to him.
Right.
And it prods him on the shoulder, and it goes, "You shouldn't be doing this way. Don't do it this way." And it retreats back into the darkness. Carl comes to, and he's got, "That was really weird." 2 weeks later, he goes into the laboratory, goes back in again. He's wandering around at the DMT. The same alien comes over again and said, "I told you last time. I told you last time. Stop doing it." Now, as Carl has said to me, and I've interviewed him on my own podcast, so you can check this on my podcast. I'm not making this up. And Carl said to me, he said, "That entity was waiting for me. It remembered me." He said, "In which case, if that was a creation of my own subconscious, my subconscious is being really clever here, because it's telling me things I don't want to hear." Because, of course, he didn't want to hear the alien telling him he shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. So the question is, what are these aliens? And I'll argue that they are thought forms, but they are thought forms like everything else is a thought form. They are tulpas. You know the concept of the tulpa?
Yeah.
Okay. So you might be aware of the work of a lady called, she was a Belgian researcher in the 1920s, Alexander Neal. And she was a researcher, and she had a very wealthy husband, allowed her to do what she wanted. So in the 1920s, she traveled around Tibet. And while she was there, a group of her associates created a tulpa. They created a thought form, a little round monk, a happy little round monk. And it manifested.
Yep.
And then it became independent of them. And it became malevolent. And they had to destroy it. They had to literally collectively think to destroy this thing, because it was acting in a way that they did not anticipate.
Yeah.
And I argue this is what happens with Ouija boards. This is what happens when people manifest entities. It's because they are using our anticipations of them to come into existence, and they will present themselves in whatever psychological imagery we need them to. This is why the Greys look like the Greys. This is why they looked in the 1950s like 6'4" Nordics. Before that, they looked like Germans, you know, in the late 19th century with the airship flaps. They follow our culture. They follow our anticipations. But the latest research in my latest book I've done on near-death experiences, I link alien encounters, alien abductions with NDEs. And I proved they're virtually the same thing. It's the same phenomenon.
That is very interesting. See, these rabbit holes are the best ones to go down, even though I'm not fully clued up with all the physics and everything about it. It's just the whole concept of it makes a lot more sense than it being a reality thing going on. It's just, it makes perfect sense.
I think it always comes down to, as you say, the rabbit hole analogy. How far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? But it's more than that. I mean, I noticed one of the images that you had at the start is the image of the rabbit. You know, and of course that again, the whole imagery of rabbits within the whole ethos of entity encounters is quite intriguing. You know, that there was a group of researchers in the 1960s, 1970s were really interested in why rabbits. Why do we see rabbits from, you know, and I think leprology. I think it was Robert Anton Wilson, I think, was particularly interested in this kind of thing, the implications of the rabbits. Right. You know, why did Dodgson, Lewis Carroll, why did he come up with the image of the white rabbit going down the rabbit hole? You know, was it that we now consider going down the rabbit hole to be the image from Lewis Carroll? Or could it be that this is an older image? Because, for instance, one of my temporal lobe epileptic associates is a very talented American artist called Myron Dial.
Right.
And he's been involved in entity encounters since he was a child. And the entities have been with him since he was a child. And he has one particular entity called Charon, which is his own daemon. And if we can get on to that later, that my whole concept of the daemon.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it guides him. But in one of my books, I think it's The Hidden Universe, I discuss his experiences when he was taken by aliens and he was dismembered. They ripped him open, ripped his guts out. Now, any anthropologists out there will realize the symbolism of the guts being ripped out. It's shamanic traveling. It's what happens in shamanic journeying. It is what traditional civilizations have done for centuries, whereby you get into altered states of consciousness, you go into the upper world or the lower world, you find your spirit guides, and they eviscerate you, they torture you, which is exactly the same that what happens when people are abducted by aliens. It's the same thing, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
So it's a question really of looking deeper beyond, because I think what happens is there's people who just believe the occult and they believe these things without really looking into them. And when you start to look into it, it starts to fall apart. You'll find an awful lot of the cases you've read or the stories you've heard are not quite as they seem. An awful lot of the near-death experience cases are not as convincing as people believe them to be when you start looking into them. But then you dig deeper again, as I do. And then when you get to that level, then the skeptics appear and they're saying, oh, it's all nonsense, you know, it's all crap. But then you go deeper again and it suddenly ceases to be crap again. It suddenly becomes much more interesting, because then we're suddenly dealing with a phenomenon that is extraordinarily fascinating and extraordinarily to do with us, but alien to us. And the more we look into consciousness, the more we look into entheogens, the more we look into DMT experiences. I mean, for instance, Anil Seth and his team, I think it was at the University of Sussex, they did an experiment a couple of years ago whereby they wanted to test what happened in the human brain when people took psilocybin, you know, magic mushrooms.
All right, yeah.
because what they believed would happen was that the psilocybin would make the brain start communicating all over and making links where there aren't.
Yes.
In fact, the opposite happened. It switches the
Oh.
brain off. It switches the brain off. And this is,
Oh.
and my hypothesis, this actually is again proof of my hypothesis. It switches the brain off for a bloody good reason, because the brain exists as an attenuator. The brain is there to cut information out, not add information. So therefore, our brain is here to allow us to work within this simulation.
Yeah.
There are things we can't see because we're not supposed to. And what happens is when we take psilocybin or DMT or whatever, what happens is it stops the brain's ability to not allow us to see these things. And suddenly we see them. Suddenly they're all around us. Yes, they're hallucinations, but everything's an hallucination. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah. That makes a lot more sense than anything else I've ever heard. Like I said, I've been going down this path, I won't use rabbit hole, for the last few weeks now, and last few months. It's like intent, manifestation. It's just everything is just so connected with that. Moving away from like the paranormal, the ghosts, the spirits, forget all that for a moment. It's this, for me, is more real than anything else, more real than reality. This is what is really going on. And like I said, I can't explain it because I don't have the words, I don't have the knowledge to explain it, but I completely get and understand it to a degree of what is actually going on. Inside, I get it, but can't put it
this
out.
is the important thing, isn't it, for me? That I attempt to try and explain quantum mechanics, cosmology, various other things in my books. I invest a great deal of time making sure I can understand to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
By reading textbooks on the subjects, which then I can reduce down to make it understandable to the person in the street.
Yeah.
And to understand exactly why it's mysterious and why it's strange. Because people are not particularly allowed to think this way, because it's not difficult to understand the concepts. It's difficult to understand the supporting material, possibly, but it's making people think outside the box, which I hate as a term. But it's the idea of the most mysterious thing is that you are, isn't it? Isn't it the most mysterious thing is that you are something looking out of your eyes, listening through your ears, inside your head, and you have, as I say, all your hopes, your dreams, and everything else. How can that be? How can anybody not be astonished? Why, for instance, there's the big within biology and within evolutionary science. One of the big questions is, why did self-referential consciousness evolve? What does it achieve? What does it really achieve to be self-aware, to have dreams, to have all these anticipations, to fall in love? How could it have evolved? A, because we don't know where it came from, but more importantly, what is its reasoning? The most successful life form on this planet is the amoeba.
Yeah,
it hasn't needed to evolve; it just is. And surely, if DNA is just there for the recreation of life, why does it need to evolve when it's got it right many, many times? Or is it just blind? And then we have the question about DNA itself. What created DNA? DNA is the thing that is the codons within DNA create the code to create life and doesn't create life, it creates living things. Where it imbues the life into it. But where did DNA come from? DNA hasn't got its own DNA. And we know that DNA is curious and strange. They know, for instance, that DNA, they can actually now encode information on DNA, like you can put on a CD-ROM.
Yeah.
And we know that DNA has codes, but there's stuff called junk DNA that we don't know what it's there for.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, one of the points I make in one of my books is that 90% of our brain is a mystery. We don't know what it's doing. And you've heard the term, we only use 10% of our brain. It's a really popular term. Very few people actually know what that means. What it means is that 10% of the cells in your brain are things called neurons.
Yeah.
And neurons communicate using neurotransmitters, the chemicals I was talking about earlier, whereby a neuron, at the end of each neuron, is a thing called a synaptic gap. And neurons don't touch, but what they do is they send chemicals across from one side to the other. And depending upon how the mood changes and everything else is what neurotransmitters are released: serotonin, neuropeptide, and various other ones, glutamate. But that's only 10% of the brain. And it's a very slow form of communication. You know, it's not fast. By general terms, it's about walking speed that these signals can go across the brain. But because the brain's not very big, it can still be effective.
Yeah.
But there's a problem within neurology and within brain science called the binding problem. And again, nobody within science wants to talk about the binding problem because, again, it's one of them. You want a neurologist who's showing off and is saying, just go explain two things. You go explain the binding problem and explain wave particle duality to a physicist, and both of them will run away. So with a binding problem, the issue is that we have a feeling of simultaneity. If I see a red bouncing ball bouncing down the road in front of me here, my brain is processing different visual fields and everything in different parts of my brain. The red is being processed. We know red doesn't really exist, but the red is being processed in one place. The movement is being processed in another. And these are in different parts of the brain. And yet we get the feeling that it's all happening now. It's all now. It's all in the moment, which is impossible using the speed that the neurons can communicate in. And that's called the binding problem, literally like binding something together. You don't know how it binds. I think the answer is a much more simple one. It's the other 9/10 of the brain. The other 9/10 of the brain are made up with something called glial cells. And glial cells, glial is from the Greek for glue. And literally when Kajol and people like that discovered the neurons, they found all these other cells around them, but they couldn't figure out what they were there for. So they thought they literally held the neurons in place. They glued them in place. But recent research has shown something extraordinary. There's something called a calcium wave. And it's a kind of a wave of information that flows across the brain within the glial network. And they believe that the glial cells communicate much quicker than neurons. And they believe they communicate using quantum effects, particularly superposition and non-locality. So you remember I was saying about you take two particles, or did I mention this about you take two particles, put them in the same quantum state, send them off in different directions, they can communicate instantaneously. They believe this is what's happening in the brain. They believe that the sections of the brain are entangled and that the binding problem can be explained by the fact that the brain communicates at the speed of light, basically. So everything communicates so quickly, you can get the feeling of simultaneity. So that's explained. But then the question has to be, well, what kind of processing power does the glial cells have? And it's extraordinary, you know, the amount of information they can hold. And is this where memory is stored? Because one of the great issues, and again, you talk to neurologists, and I spend time talking to them, nobody knows where memories are stored. They know what parts of the brain process memories, but it's different. Where it's processed is not the same as where it's stored. We know from computer analogies about this. We know the amygdala and various other structures within the brain do this, but we don't know where memories are. In fact, researchers such as Carl Pribram, they spent years, and it was Carl Lashley, Pribram's teacher. Carl Lashley was a researcher who spent years trying to find memories in the brain, what they call the engram. They never found it. He couldn't find it. He gave up in the end. They don't know where memories are. And yet you can sit there and you can suddenly go, Manchester United, you know, when they played Spurs, and you'll remember it being a Manchester United supporter. You may even remember when Manchester United was successful, but that's probably unlikely.
That was a while ago.
But the thing is that we can instantaneously bring back a memory. Not only that, but we can do it subconsciously, because there are memories called charged memories that we have that are those memories, you know, when you sometimes, for no apparent reason, a memory just flood, a memory of your childhood just suddenly
Yeah.
is there in your head, just appears.
Yeah.
You haven't
Yeah.
asked for it. It's just happened. These are called charged memories. A lady called Esther Salomon did the main research on this, a Russian psychiatrist. But we don't know where they come from. But there was a series of extraordinary discoveries made in the 1950s by a guy called Wilder Penfield, who was a neurosurgeon in Canada. And he found that by touching the surface of the brain with an electrode, he was able to evoke memories, literally reliving of memories, as if it was a film, a recording, that by pressing a certain point on the temporal lobes, they could take somebody back to literally relive something. Because this could explain hypnotic regression. You know, you can regress somebody. I give an example in one of my books. There was the Chowchilla case in 1972, I think, when there was a group of children that were abducted in Southern California in a bus, school bus. And the bad guys kicked the bus driver off the bus and then drove, and they buried the bus for some reason, which I've never understood. They buried the bus to trap the children. And they were searching for the kids, the police. And one of the police researchers thought, we might be able to find out what really happened. So they had the bus driver, and they hypnotized him. And they took him back to when he was driving the bus as to what happened when the bad guys turned up. And the bad guys, apparently, he explained in his dream state, in his hypnotic state, described how a car cut in front of them and made him stop. And they got on the bus. But he was able, in his dream state, to remember the number plate. And they caught them. And they caught them. Now, this is extraordinary. It means that we have access to memories that we can't normally access. In other words, we have access to every single memory we have, every single experience we have. And I know this because on my own podcast, I interviewed a young lady from Australia who has something called HSAM, highly superior autobiographical memory.
Okay.
She remembers everything in her life. She even remembers her dreams, and she remembers being in the womb. So being me, I wanted to test her live. We were going out on a live broadcast.
Yeah.
And I knew that she was particularly interested in the books, the Harry Potter books.
Yeah.
Now, my associate, Sarah, who we used to do the show together, Sarah's daughter also has all the Harry Potter books. So I asked Sarah, while I was talking to the young lady, I asked Sarah to get out her Harry Potter books and pick one of the Harry Potter books at random. Then flick through the pages and pick a page at random, and then pick a paragraph at random. And then without telling, I just announced to the young girl, and I said, okay, we're going to test you now. Sarah's going to read a section from Harry Potter. I want you to tell me and finish it. Sarah read 4 words. She said the whole paragraph.
Wow.
Word for word accurate. Now, that is a known phenomenon. But nobody's asking how this works. I'm probably one of the few writers in the world saying, okay, fine, we know it's happening, but how can we explain this? And I explain it because the human brain is a recorder, and it's recording all our experiences, and it's recording them and downloading them to be used later. And it's used when you're dying. All your memories, all your recordings of all your memories are all there.
Yeah.
And when you start to die, you start, well, again, if you know in near-death experience, there's something called a panoramic life review. My life flashed before my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I argue that in a near-death experience, your life flashes before your eyes. But in a real death experience, an RDE, it doesn't. Because time changes. Time expands. Right. We know this when you're in an accident, when you're given bad news. I wrote a book called The Labyrinth of Time explaining this. Yeah. So all the things I'm telling you here are all in my books, and there's 13 books of them. So all of them explain. There's a book on time. There's a book on alien abductions. There's a book on NDEs. There's a book on, there's everything is in there. And the idea is that the panoramic, because people turn around and say that my life flashed before my eyes. Now, what I argue is really happening here is when you start to die, your daemon, your higher self, the person
Yeah.
that's lived your life many times before, the person who is your game player within the simulation, which we'll come on to in a second. We'll talk about the daemon eidolon dyad in a second. But the daemon suddenly becomes aware that it's independent of its normal self, the eidolon.
Yeah.
In other words, at the point of death, you split into two personalities.
Right.
The daemon realizes one thing it has to do. It has to start the life review. And literally, metaphorically, it's like the old tape recorder where you press the play button. But in a near-death experience, the very point is the person doesn't die. And the daemon realizes the person's not going to die. So it metaphorically presses the fast forward. And that's why your life flashes before your eyes. That's why. That's exactly why. And again, I'm the only person that's ever said that. Only person on the planet that's ever made that point. So it's suddenly vroomf, and it's super fast. And that's why people go, whoa, whoa. I saw it in a series of images. Because in a real death experience, the daemon presses it and boom, you're back to your birth. And you're in the simulation of your birth. It's surrounding you. You're in a VR version of your life.
Yeah.
In real time. Like I said with my friend, when she had the TLE person, when she had lived a whole lifetime in a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
Because this is what happens. We know that time dilates. And we know time dilates, and we know time dilation from physics. We know as you get closer to the speed of light, time expands unbelievably. So we know, and if the idea of thought, and I've never really thought about this before, but the first time I put this together in my own mind, but if the glial cells are literally communicating at the speed of light, that means that thought can travel at the speed of light. And if thought travels at the speed of light, it means that from the position of a thought, there is no time. And if we are our thoughts, effectively our consciousness is always traveling at the speed of light. So there is no time. So in which case, when you start to die, you go into that kind of timeless place where you can live a whole life in the final nanoseconds of your life. And at the end of that life, you live another life and another life and another life, all of which are drawn up from this whole information field. You know, I mentioned the many worlds interpretation, where there are trillions of versions of you. It means there are trillions of outcomes of every decision you can make in your life. So literally everything, as Brian Cox's book subtitle said, anything that can happen will happen. You know, there's that movie recently, Everything Everywhere All at the Same Time.
Yeah.
This is basically what I'm saying, is that there are levels of time, and there are levels of consciousness. And when you go into these altered states, you can then move like playing a computer game.
Yeah.
Now, going back then, so you're playing a computer game, you know, imagine it's a virtual reality computer game. Start the game for the first time. You're the game player. Start the game and imagine it's the game of your life. It literally is a program of your life. So you start the game and you have a little on-screen creature, which is you in the game.
Yeah.
You know, when you play these games, you start it up. There's a little Lara Croft or whatever. The game player then starts the game and doesn't know the environment or anything. So your little game character, your avatar on screen, wanders into a room. There's a bloody big monster in there, and she gets killed. She's dead. She's lived one life, and that's it. She's dead. She's what I called an eidolon. But your game player, your daemon, restarts the game again.
Yeah.
And suddenly there's a new eidolon that has no memories of the previous ones, but the game player remembers what happened last time. So the little eidolon, she's wandering around the corridor, and she suddenly gets this sensation, something making her not go into the room, which is the game player going, you don't want to go in there. So she has this sensation, this feeling, this inkling, this voice in her head warning her. So she doesn't go into that room, and she goes into another room and gets killed. So you can see where I'm going here, that over a period of games or lives, the daemon, the real you, explores your whole life and all the outcomes of your life, and wherever you can go, wherever you can do. And again, many people out there will be saying, this is like a movie. And it is. It's Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
only it's Groundhog Life. And the Russian language edition of my first book was actually called Groundhog Life, because the Russians twigged where I was going with this.
Yeah.
So we live our lives many, many times. And this is why deja vu works. We remember. You remember you've done it before because you have. You have done it before. And again, I always argue that the most powerful proof of my hypothesis is that very fact. You know, and I know there are neurological explanations for deja vu, like the Uphron thesis and things, but they've been disproved. You know, when people turn around and say, oh, deja vu's been explained, there are 172 separate theories of deja vu. Mine's one of them. And mine is in there with one of them. It's either 172 or 72. I'm not sure which. It might be 72. But there was a lot. But it's a lot. Yeah. And there's that many hypotheses because nobody knows. Nobody knows what exactly deja vu is. I say it's exactly how it feels. You feel you've been there before, you know.
Yeah.
And people will turn around to me and say, oh, it's evidence of reincarnation. And in the introduction to my last book, second to last book, I said, just think about that for a second. If I'm sitting here and suddenly I'm remembering an incident in this location from a past life.
Yeah.
Why am I not remembering it with people wearing Victorian clothes? Why am I not remembering it with horse carriages and things around me? I'm not. I'm seeing a scene. If I have a deja vu sensation now, I see cars going up and down the road.
Yeah.
And I see buildings that are modern buildings. I don't see Victorian buildings or peasant huts. Do you? You see the point I'm making here?
Yeah.
So to turn around and say it's a remembrance of a past life is nonsense. It's not the way it is. I can explain past lives, which I do in one of my books. And I explain it's because, you know, I said that there is a program containing the outcome of every decision of your life. There's a program of everybody's lives, everybody on the planet. And it's been going out through history. So therefore, there is information that you can attune into at a higher level where you can get into the mind of a 17th century French peasant for a second when you're hypnotized. And that you believe it was you, and it's not you. It's because ultimately we think we are individuals. We think and that's our ego. We are not individuals. We are just part of an information field. We are part of a greater collective consciousness. You know, it's very much what Carl Jung argued and what various other people have argued. We are, as Bill Hicks said, the great American comedian, we are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. So at the higher levels, we are everybody and everybody. So this is how this virtual reality thing works. You know, and I said, we're all co-creating it.
Yeah.
We in many ways as individuated consciousnesses are not co-creating it, but the collective consciousness is. So there is this greater consciousness that's creating this, and we exist within it.
Yeah. I now get from you saying that why time doesn't exist.
Yeah. And of course, people confuse time with entropy. They argue that, you know, time progresses, but no, things go from a state of order to disorder, which people consider to be time. People also consider, they look at a clock and they think, oh, that's time. Well, no, it's not. It's geometry, actually. It's the hand moving.
Yeah.
But that's not time. Yeah. And a moment's reflection, you know, that time is the only thing that's measured by itself. You can have a pound of apples. You can have, I don't know, you know, well, there's various things, but then you use another measuring device. Whereas time, you know, you can have a minute of a minute. And I've no idea whether your minute is the same as my minute. There's no way I can know that.
Yeah.
And very cleverly, there was a guy who wrote a book, I think in 1927, called J.W. Dunn, John William Dunn, called An Experiment with Time. And in this, he came up with a wonderful analogy of how the illusion of time works. He said, we think that time flows, or we flow through it, you know. But the point of the matter is, how do we know time flows? If I'm looking at a river, I can see a river and I can see it flowing because there's riverbanks. isn't it?
Yeah.
So you see the riverbanks, they don't move, and the river moves. Now take the riverbanks away. How could you tell? And you're moving with the river. You've got no way of telling that the
No.
river is moving. And that's what
No.
we're like in time. We are in time, and time is moving, and we're moving with it. So the question is, what does time flow against? And he was very clever, Don. He turned around and he said, well, imagine that there is another time next to this time, which he called time 2. And it's like, and it flows in a different speed. So you can gauge your speed against the other bank, the other time. And he then argued that there will be a version of you in the other time, which he called observer 2, which is my Daemon.
Okay.
It's the same idea. It's a consciousness that's outside of time, that's looking at time.
Yeah.
Now, again, people, as St. Augustine said, and I said it when I wrote my book on time, we think we understand time till we really think about it. For instance, what is time? Well, the future doesn't exist because it hasn't happened yet. Okay. The past has already gone, so it doesn't exist. Yeah. So we're at the nexus point between two things that don't exist. The past, which is gone and can never be again, and the future, which is yet to be and hasn't been yet. But we are at that sliver of a point, the now, the present moment. And that's all there is. So there's just this tiny sliver of nothing moving between two nothings. And it's when you think about this and you go, my head hurts.
I was just going to say that.
But it's true, isn't it? It's true. So that, and then you have the question, and philosophers have argued this for years. What is the present moment? How long is it? How long is the present moment? How can you divide it? And you keep dividing it, you end up with smaller and smaller bits of time. So in which case then is time quantized? Is time like energy? Is it in little bits? In which case I think David Finkelstein came up with the concept of the chronon, the kind of subatomic particle of time. And the idea then is, if time is made up of bits, what's between the bits? Because it's not time. And
my head does hurt.
And it's the great book on this is somebody I'm hoping to meet in the next few weeks. I mean, an intellectual hero of his for years, a Cambridge-educated mathematician called Julian Barber, and in 1999 he wrote a book called The End of Time. And he argues that time doesn't exist at all, and that it's our brains that create time. And in fact, what it is, it's a series of still images, like a cartoon, and you have a still image and a still image, you superimpose them and it gives the illusion of movement. He argues that's what's really happening, that the illusion of movement is brought about by how our visual system works and everything else, because everything is, he calls the timeless place behind Platonia. And he does the maths of this. This guy's a brilliant guy. He's a Cambridge educated mathematician. He knows his stuff. And there are independent people doing this kind of research now, asking these very questions, and they are massive questions and so important that we have answers to, if we can.
Because I've always tried, well, not always tried, but you try and work out, like, now, as soon as you say now, it's gone. So you can't measure it. It's literally impossible.
You can't. There is a concept. William James, who was an American psychiatrist, and in 1900 he came up with, I think it was 1900, he came up with a concept called the specious present, and he argued that we probably have a little bit of the past within our brains and a little bit of the future. And the reason he argued this, and it's very clever, it's how we hear tunes. Because think about this for a second. When you hear a tune, it's individual notes. But we don't hear each individual note. We hear a tune. It's as if we blur and blend the knowledge of the previous note into the present note and the future note to give us a tune. Because music, again, the appreciation of music is neurologically quite fascinating. It's a simple thing, but it's not.
Yeah.
And this means that maybe we smear out. So maybe the present is slightly broader. And this, I've argued, is why probably we jump when we hear a bang. Because have you ever noticed the bang you seem to jump before the bang.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
because there is an argument to state that we can monitor the immediate future. And this is a defense mechanism that we know slightly ahead of time. And there's been experiments done. There's a guy called Dean Radin. I throw information out to people. You should make notes of it. A guy called Dean Radin and Dick Bierman did some work with people whereby what happens is the human skin has a conductance. The electricity in the skin changes when you're fearful.
Yes.
And what they did was they realized this, and they realized they could measure the skin conductance. And what they did was they placed people in a darkened room, and a series of photographs would flash by on a screen, and it'd be bunny rabbits and cloudscapes and everything else. But then they'd place in there a car crash or a murder scene. Yeah. And the vast majority of people, before the picture was shown of the disturbing sequence, their skin conductance went up.
Oh.
And they concluded that this was because we seem to monitor our future slightly. And one of the reviewers said, as you may know, I wrote a book on the life of Philip K. Dick, the American science fiction writer. And in one of the reviews, they said that this is similar to the concept of precogs in the movie Minority Report, which was written by Philip K. Dick.
Yes.
Philip K. Dick was a precog. This whole point of my book with him is proving that he was a precog. But the idea that we can see the future then is intriguing. It means that, again, time, how we process time, is quite different. And there's so many books on the philosophy of time. It's quite extraordinary. It's such a mystery.
Yeah. But it's like going from what you've just said to something that I wanted to touch on, and it's right straight into it, is when you get that gut feeling. Because the gut feeling happens just before, usually, a major event.
Yeah.
A major personal event. And you get that, it could be minutes, could be seconds before whatever it is going to happen. And when I go out doing investigations, so shall we say, and I'm out in could be a building, could be out in a field, could be a cemetery, wherever, I'll get a gut feeling. And if that gut feeling saying you need to go now, I'm not going to stand there and question it. That's my first, like someone mentioned Steve Mera, said to Steve Mera about it, that I get that gut feeling, I'm gone. I'm not hanging about. That's your first warning. I don't want a second warning, because the second warning ain't going to be as polite. Yeah. So it's get up and go. There's not, you don't have to do it like straight away, but within the next few moments, you need to be leaving whatever it is that you're doing. I strongly believe that. And I also heard, I can't remember who it was that said it, that people, the gut feeling comes from there. Now, people are professionals are trying to say it doesn't actually come from there. And that's where you feel it, but it's coming from different parts of your body, whether it's your subconsciousness, your consciousness, parts of the brain, wherever, but you get it in like your solar plexus. But it is, and it's the same sort of concept as what you was just saying. For me, it is anyway.
Totally. It's the inkling, the feeling that something is dangerous or is wrong. In fact, there's a really great book called The Book of Life, The Meaning of Life, written by John Lloyd and Douglas Adams. And it's a dictionary of definitions of things that are no names for. And one of them is called, and they name towns from Britain and Europe to define these things. I'll give an example. An Ely is that first feeling you have that something's gone terribly, terribly wrong. And one of my favorites. Well, there's two that are one of my two or three of my favorites. It's just full of them. It's a great book, but one of them is Mavis Enderby, which is a place in Lincolnshire. And Mavis,
okay, I know it.
This. Yeah. In the Book of Life, Mavis Enderby is that woman or partner in your past that your present partner has an irrational hatred for. Okay.
I think everyone can relate to that.
Now, here's a nice synchronicity. I now know John Lloyd, the guy that wrote it with Douglas Adams. He's a friend of mine. And John contacted me a few years ago because he read one of my books and really loved it and things. And he we got talking one Friday about, we were chatting on the phone, and I brought up that I loved Mavis Enderby, and I thought of all the concepts he'd come up with, Mavis Enderby was wonderful. Or no, maybe I can't tell this one actually, probably because no, I can't, because I might be saying something that might cause problems in the future. But
fair enough.
But Mavis Enderby was really interesting, and I particularly those little wads of paper that you put under chairs to stop them wobbling.
Yes,
They are Ludlows. You know. And another really good one is Start Point, and Start Point is a place in Devon. And Start Point is when you're walking down a corridor and there's somebody walking towards you that you know. There's a point where you both can acknowledge each other. If you do it too early, it's really embarrassing. And the book is just full of beautiful things where you just read it and you burst out laughing time and time again. So what you're getting there is an Ely. But what I'd really argue is what you're really getting there is your day. Either it is you subconsciously remembering from last time what happened, or your daemon is warning you. And because your doors of perception are not sufficiently open for your daemon to speak to you, because for some people, the daemon can speak directly. Normally, the daemon will communicate through dreams or inklings. With neurotypicals whose doors of perception are closed, the daemon can only talk to you through hints or whatever. So you get that gut feeling. Now, I don't know whether, and I'm thinking aloud here, but I wonder whether the linkage here with the gut feeling is to do with DMT, because DMT is found in the lining of the stomach and the liver and various other places, and in the gut. So it could be that the DMT is what's causing that, and the DMT is resonating with the DMT within the pineal gland, and that works together in some neurological way, non-locally. So there's an idea that's a possibility, maybe. I don't know. There's a bit of research that could be done there, I think. So I think you've hit the nail on the head there quite accurately with something that's intriguing, I think, because that's where I get the feeling when there's you get butterflies in your stomach, you know.
Well, that was the next one I was going to say. So when something good is going to happen, you get the butterflies, which is a completely same place, but completely different sensation.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And it's a really lovely sensation of this is a good, warm feeling. And, you know, and the feeling you get, you know, when you see somebody the first time that you know is going to be important, that pain in your heart. You know, that's why they have the little arrows in the heart. It's because that you feel it in your heart. You know, and it's, you know, these are not old wives' tales. These are things that happen, you know, and, you know, very much, you know, human beings really need to think more about how they experience the world and how the world seems to them, because the answers are as much inside you as they are outside.
It's being able to read it all, though, isn't it? I think that's the key.
It's there is so much, and rather like was it Aristotle turned around and said, "The more I know, the less I know," and that's what I've discovered. You know, I you know, all the books behind me, that I've read them all. You know, and well, some of them are my wife's books, which I haven't read, but in general, you know, that I just get so excited and so saddened. But then again, if I can remember from this life into the next life and carry forward the things I've learned in this life, I can carry on with my ideas in one way or another. Or if for one reason or another I inspire somebody else, because this is my last book, the latest book that's out. I've no intention of writing anymore. I've done what I need to do. But I have a number of writers I've inspired who are now carrying forward a lot of the ideas. And it's wonderful to know, you know, that that people are
being carried on.
And it was really lovely as well at Contact in the Desert, which, as I say, I'm back again at the end of May. is that when this will be the fourth time I've done it. Once we did it virtually because of COVID, and then this will be the third year on the trot I've done it. And when I first went there, the vast majority of people had never heard of me, which is the way I like it, because it was astonishing watching the reactions the second day when people had gone to see me talk, and more people were turning up every day because people were saying, "My God, have you seen this guy? He's different." And it was so nice. And I've gone down so well now. You know, they were desperate to get me this year as well. So all good, I think. So the work is getting out there, and people. I don't believe for 1 minute that my work. I genuinely believe my work has value, and I genuinely believe that my work will be picked up at some time in the future, but probably after I'm gone. But I think that I'm laying such an amount of interviews and writings and articles now that there's a lot of material out there that people can follow up on in one way or another. And I thank people like you for inviting me on their shows, because without you guys, I couldn't get it out there.
Yeah, no, totally get that. And thank you so much for coming on. We do have a question for you, if that's okay. Yeah. I don't know how short or how long the answer is going to be. But I'll put it out anyway. So this is from Darren, Baby with Laser, fellow Manc. Unfortunately, he supports Man City, but you can't have everything, can you? So he's saying, Anthony, can you explain the double slit experiment?
I can certainly try to. Right. Way back in 1900, a guy called John Young did a series of experiments with light. Because up until that time, the general consensus of opinion was that light was made of particles, and it was very much what Isaac Newton believed light to be, little pulses of light. But when Young did his experiment, what he did was he took a light source, and then in front of the light source, he had a single slit, and the light source then went through the slit, and then in front of it he had two slits or two holes, and the light went through. And when it did, it was extraordinary, because what it showed was that light wasn't particles, it was a wave, because they had what was called interference patterns. You know, when you kind of throw a stone into the water, the waves go outwards. Now if you then on a pond then place a barrier with a slit in it, what happened? There were two slits. What happens is the waves go along, and when they go through the slit, they start two more wave groups. Okay, and the two wave groups then interfere with each other, and depending upon whether the waves are in sync or not in sync is whether the wave gets bigger or whether it just dissipates itself and becomes nothing. Now, when they did it with light, how they found this out was that they put you could see at the end of the wall, you would have what was called bands of light, black lines and light lines. Okay. And that's proved that light was a wave. But the problem with that discovery was profound. The reason being that if light is a wave needs a medium to go in, like light waves, water waves need water. It's the water that's waving. You still there? Okay. It's the water that's waving, not the light. Okay. So you need water. Sound waves are the same. It's in the air, and it's the air that compresses and expands. All well and good. So waves travel in a medium, and they always need a medium. But the question is, how do light waves cross space from the sun or from the stars? Because space is a vacuum, and there's nothing in it. So how do the light waves get from the sun, the 93 million miles, to the earth? Because there's nothing there, there's a vacuum. So this was a real problem. So what the scientists did was they came up with a hypothetical substance they call the luminiferous ether. Luminiferous meaning literally light carrying, light bearing. Like the name Christopher means Christ bearer, so it's from the Latin. So, but there was an experiment that took place I think it was in about 1885, 87, something like that, called the Michelson-Morley experiment. Without getting technical, they proved that the ether didn't exist. So they had a real problem. Because whereas the original idea that light was tiny little hard bits of something, little hard bits can fly through space, whereas a wave can't. So they had a real issue with this. And it got worse then when they started to reproduce, because they wanted to know more about light. Was light a wave or a particle? So what they did was they reproduced the Young's twin slit experiment using light sensitive film. And they found that every time when it went through the twin slits, it was a wave. So they needed to know what was really happening. Were they really particles or not? Was it a wave? So what they decided to do was to put sensor devices on either of the slits, because what they did was, now this is clever, what they did was they said, right, okay, we've got the twin slits and we've got the waves going through. Let's get a gun type of thing that can fire bits of light, single bits of light. And if it's single bits of light, it should go through, it can only go through one slit or the other. A single bit of light can't go through both. It can only go through one.
Yeah.
But they did this with single things, and they still got the interference patterns. And they thought, this doesn't make sense. So they placed a measuring device on one slit or the other. And much to their absolute amazement, the minute you put a measuring device on one of the slits, the interference pattern disappears.
Oh.
You get two bands, exactly as if the light was going through both at the same time. Take the measurement device away, it goes back again. It's one of the greatest mysteries of physics. Impossible. It's as if the light knows it's being observed. Now, the solution to this is that the waves themselves become particles when they are measured. Remember I was saying before about the measurement issue? And the twin slit experiment was the one that proved it. And this is why Einstein had a real problem, because it then was the argument, well, if the act of measurement or the act of observation turns a wave into a particle, what's going on? What happens to the waves if they're not observed? What's happening there? And then it became extraordinary, because in 1933, I think it was, no, it was earlier, they discovered they did the twin slit experiment with electrons. Now, waves are photons. Photons are strange things, as I mentioned before. They can travel at the speed of light and everything else. But they found that little point particles of matter have the same issue. You fire little electrons, they're a wave, and then they become a particle when they're observed. Now, this then gets really freaky, because it suggests that they've now done it, get this, they've now done it with atoms.
Right.
And molecules, big molecules. The largest molecule I think they put through that seems to come into existence by the act of measurement is a buckyball. A buckyball is a lattice-shaped molecule that is huge. I think it has 60 atoms in it.
Right.
And yet it does exactly the same. It's a wave. If it's observed or measured, becomes a particle. Now, in 1933, I think it was, Max Born, the great-grandfather of Olivia Newton-John, by the way, bit of useless information there for you. He suggested, to explain certain mathematical issues they were having with the quantum theory, he suggested that, and get this, that the wave of matter is not a physical wave. It's a mathematical wave. It's a statistical wave. It's like a crime wave. It's not real in that way. And all that happens is that it's a mathematical wave function that predicts where a subatomic particle will be found after it's collapsed.
Right.
So within the wave, there is literally information that the the subatomic particle can be anywhere in the universe. And statistically, there's more chance of it being in one particular place than another. But effectively, it's only the act of measurement that makes it do this. Now, this is extraordinary. And it has so many implications. For example, this is why they came up with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Because Erwin Schrödinger came up with his Schrödinger's cat experiment. Because he said, well, hold on, if it's a wave and it only becomes a particle, and in reality when it's observed, what would happen if for an hour I locked a live cat in a box, a sealed box that nobody else can look into, and inside the sealed box there are two subatomic particles that may or may not collapse? Okay. Yeah, I don't know about how clear I can make this, but it's whether they will collapse or not. And they cannot collapse if they're not observed according to the observations. So he said, if you lock the box and you have these two little particles, one of which may or may not collapse. If it does, it sends a signal to a little hammer that's sitting next to a glass of cyanide. And the little hammer will, if it collapses, the signal goes through, the hammer swings across, smashes the file, and it releases the cyanide and kills the cat.
Right.
Now, you know that in that hour, there's a 50-50 chance that it may or may not happen.
Yeah.
But nobody's observing it. So it's only a wave function, which means it doesn't exist, which means until the cat is observed, nobody knows whether the cat is alive or dead. And it's basically both while it's in the box. The only time you actually know is when you open the box to see a live cat or a dead cat.
Yeah.
And in 1957, a young PhD student called Hugh Everett III, who again is the father of, do you remember the band? They did Susan's House a few years ago, big hit record, Eels, the Eels.
Yes.
He is the lead singer of the Eels is Hugh Everett's son.
Oh,
this is the nonsense I know. The nonsense I know. Is crazy. So what he suggested was there's a solution to this, and it's nothing to do with conscious observation. What he said was, and it gets crazy, he said that what happens is when the box is opened, the scientist splits into two scientists. One scientist sees a live cat and the other scientist sees a dead cat. So the universe is split into identical copies of itself. And the research that's been taking place since Hugh Everett did that is proving more and more that he was right. That the universe splits all the time into identical copies of itself, which then follow their own wave function. Because, of course, the wave function technically has not collapsed. So it continues. So it means that this is how all these universes come into existence. And this is the central point of Einstein's problem about seeing the moon. Because again, going back to what I said earlier on, he thought that this was all nonsense and the twin slit experiment didn't make any sense to him. And he believed that it's because we are misinterpreting what we're really seeing. And at a lower level of reality, there are hidden variables, which I've argued, that we've only got part of the picture.
Yeah.
We're seeing the tip of an iceberg and we're assuming we know everything, whereas the answers are underneath. So what we're seeing at the moment is results of experiments that we can't link yet.
Yeah.
But when we can, it will all suddenly make sense. And I'd like to believe that my model is as good as anybody else's as to what the explanation could be. And the explanation is everything is consciousness. Everything we perceive is consciousness generated. There is no in there. There is no out there. It's all us. It's all life. It's all awareness.
Yeah.
And as soon as we start to realize this, the mystery of how the brain creates consciousness goes away. The brain doesn't create consciousness. It processes it like a radio processes a radio signal. It's the same kind of thing.
It's a transmitter.
But thanks. That's an excellent question. I've never had the opportunity to explain that live. I did an event in New York many years ago, and I had about 300 or 400 people in Manhattan turn up for one of my talks. And halfway through the talk, some guy turned up, stood up in the middle of the audience and said, "I'm going to stop you there." He said, "I'm a professor of physics at Princeton University." And he said, "I think you're a bullshitter. I think you don't understand what you're talking about. So and I think you're just very well scripted." So he said, "I'm going to give you, I'm going to ask you to explain." So he said, "Please explain Heisenberg's uncertainty principle." So I did.
Yeah.
And he sat there and his mouth just opened. And I said, "Am I right?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I didn't know you were going to ask me that, did you?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Can I talk to you afterwards about this?" He ran away.
Really?
He ran away.
Scared him off.
Yeah.
That's where it is.
Yeah. Hubris.
Yeah. Wow. It's massive thank you for coming on.
It's okay.
I will try and process about 10% of what you said. Like you said, I get exactly what you're saying, and I understand it in the way I understand things. But for me to then put it back out there, impossible. It just couldn't do it. Couldn't do it.
That's always my problem. I think I understand what I mean, and I know it makes sense to me. But I'm not vain enough to assume that I'm a good enough describer to get my ideas, what's going on in my head, to other people. That's the challenge.
Did. No, you really did. For me to understand it, yeah, that's massive. But it's like the last thing that you're talking about. There's a lot of double contradictions in it, and I find that in the world of the paranormal anyway. Everything contradicts itself, but it makes sense at the same time. The more contradiction, the more sense it makes.
Well, that's it. You know, the whole Jacques Vallée idea of the cosmic joker, the idea that there's a joking going on here. There's they're playing with us in one way or another.
Yeah.
The phenomenon itself seems to be aware it's being observed and plays games with us.
Yeah.
You know, it is a conundrum. It is, the more you dive into it, the more mysterious it becomes. I mean, you know, the people I meet at Contact in the Desert and Talks, they have had extraordinary experiences. There's no question. They're not making it up.
No.
People have these experiences, you know, and I always find it amusing when I do events with scientists, when I'm involved in debates and things. It's always very funny because the same thing happens. We'll have our debates and they'll disagree with me and I'll disagree with them on certain things. We go out for a drink afterwards, and I just wait for the moment when one of them will say, "I don't believe a word you're saying, but there was one thing that happened to me that I've never understood and never explained." And they'll tell me something. And I always come back and I say, "So why don't you talk about that in your writings? Why don't you mention this?" And they all say the same. Academic tenure, reputation, you can't be allowed to do this. You know, for instance, Brian Josephson, the Nobel Prize winner for the Josephson junctions, very famous British physicist, one of the few living Nobel Prize winners, British Nobel Prize winners. He was denied going on stamps. They did stamps for Nobel Prize winners a few years ago. They denied him going on it initially because he was interested in identifying in investigating telepathy. That's how bad it is. And he was a Nobel Prize winner.
Wow. That's bad.
And he was considered to be an idiot. How anybody could turn round and question Brian Josephson's intellect, I have no idea, but they do.
Wow. It takes all sorts, doesn't it? It really, really does.
Certainly does. Okay, well, Andy, thank you very much for being on the show. I look forward to it when it's uploaded properly as well. Now,
yes, this will be on pretty much straight away. It'll be going out as audio on podcast, Spotify. Well, there was Podbean. I should know. That's the one I used to upload it. Apple Podcast. We are also on Audible, so you can listen to it back on there. And whatever other podcast player, or you can watch it back on YouTube, which will stay on there indefinitely until YouTube decide one day that you want to take me down. So,
right, wonderful. Okay, Andy, all the best.
Thank you so much.
Oh yes, very quickly, just a very quick point as well. If anybody's interested, I'm doing a formal book launch of my new book at Watkins Bookshop. I think it's the 17th of April at 5:30. I'll also be in London during that day if anybody wants to meet up with me and just continue these conversations, because I normally get 20 or 30 readers and we all get together and spend all day talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
So
is that
you know,
central London?
Yeah. What I will do is I'll be in the area around Blackfriars.
Yeah.
But Watkins Bookshop, if you've never been to Watkins Bookshop, you should go to it. It's one of the world's leading esoteric bookshops.
Oh,
it's incredible.
I'm sure I've been. It rings a bell. So
it's where Aleister Crowley used to go and people like that.
The thing is, though, whenever I go to London when I'm not working, I always end up having a few beers.
Absolutely.
So.
And why not? Okay, I must shoot.
Forget
okay,
then. No, thank you so much. See you again, Anthony.
Yeah,
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Right, so that's it. Thank you everyone for tuning in. It was an early one. As Anthony said earlier, he can only do days, so that's why we've had to do it during the day and not in the evening. So anyone missed it, you can watch it back. You can listen to it on podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and all the others. We are not on tomorrow due to somebody having a birthday. This is just walked in, that's why I had to go. But I will be back on Friday. Nicole isn't on because she is out on investigation. But on Friday, we have got Bigfoot Dwarf coming on from the US. So he's going to be talking about his stuff. So thank you so much. And there are more additions to the merchandise that I can send out directly. Holographic stickers, a few other little bits and pieces, but I'm going to be doing a show on that in the next it won't be tomorrow, so it'll probably be Thursday at some point. So I'm going to get that sorted out and sent out, and there'll be an update on price and so on and so on. Darren said happy birthday.
Thanks, Darren.
Yeah, she always says your name like that. So yeah, have a great couple of days everyone. I'll see you back at the normal time on Friday, so have fun. And Wayne, be careful at Bempton. Don't get attacked by the giant puffin outside the RSPB place, wherever it is. So yeah, that's it. Have fun everyone, and I will see you Friday. Take care and goodbye, if anything works.
Goodbye.